So let's look at an example of this single restriction, this hypothesis testing about a single parameter here. So let's say we're interested in the determinants of college GPA. So that's our y variable. And I'm going to put a hat because we're going to write out results from a regression. So we have this theoretical regression, and now we're going to write out the results for it. So here's our beta hat 0, and below it in brackets is going to be our standard error. This is kind of a normal format to give regression results in. So this is our beta hat 0, this is our standard error. And so the first x variable is going to be 0.412 is going to be GPA. So this is maybe high school GPA, I'll put. So we're trying to think of the determinants of college GPA. So this is our beta hat 1. This is our x1 as high school GPA. So that's the first thing we think might determine college GPA. And again, here's our standard error of this beta hat 1 there. Then we think that standardized test scores matter. So 0.15 and ACT, so a standardized test in the US, the ACT, or SAT, kind of think of SAT if that's more familiar with you. This is our beta hat for this effect of the SAT, 0.11. And let's say the other thing that might determine college GPA is how many classes you skipped. So minus 0.083 times skipped. And our standard error for the beta hat skipped, so beta hat skipped is minus 0.083, and that's 0.026. And let's say we have 141 individuals in our sample. So we can know right away that our K, 1, 2, 3, our K is equal to 3. Okay, so let's say we wanted to test the effect of high school GPA on college GPA. We want to know if high school GPA has any effect on college GPA. Well, that's testing beta 1 or beta high school GPA, whichever you prefer, equals 0. Our alternative is that the true effect does not equal 0. We're going to calculate our test statistics, so our t ratio, 0.412. That was our beta hat for the high school GPA, minus our hypothesis value, 0 in this case, over the standard error. So this is the standard error, 0.094. That gives us 4.38, and we know that this t ratio is at t n minus k minus 1. So if we wanted to look up the critical values for this distribution, 141 minus 3 minus 1. So it's the t distribution with 137 degrees of freedom. That's how this t ratio is distributed. So we specify if we're testing at 1, 5, or 10%. And then to reach a conclusion, if 4.38 is greater than the critical value, of the t distribution with 137 degrees of freedom, we're going to reject the null. So that was option A. Option B would be to calculate the p-value. If this p-value is less than alpha, example 0.1, 0.05, or 0.01, then we can reject the null. So here, we're never going to do this by hand. Stata is going to tell us, so if you ever don't have results like this, you can just tell me how you make a conclusion about the test? Well, I look up the critical value for the t-distribution with 137 degrees of freedom, and I check to see whether that was less than or greater than 4.38. If it's less than 4.38, I'm going to reject the null. Otherwise, I'm going to fail to reject the null. Otherwise, you can say, well, I'd calculate the p-value for this by calculating the area to the left and the right of 4.38 and negative 4.38. So to the left of negative 4.38 and to the right of positive 0.438. I'd calculate that area, and I'd see if it's bigger than the threshold that I'm willing to make a type 1 error, of the threshold that I'm willing to make a type 1 error of. In this case, I mean, if we actually looked it up, this is going to be significant at 1%. So if we actually calculated the p-value, we'd see the p-value is less than 0.01. But otherwise, if you don't know and you might not be able to tell, just on a midterm or you don't have enough information, you'd have to look up the critical value or figure out what the p-value was. Okay, so here we'd reject the null that we should write out our conclusion somewhere. So we'd use this to come to our conclusion, and we'd reject the null that high school GPA has no influence on college GPA. So we should probably write a concluding sentence kind of stating what our actual conclusion of our test is. So here our null was that high school GPA has no effect on college GPA, and it's significant at 1%, so the p-value is less than 0.01, so we're going to reject the null that high school GPA has no influence on college GPA. So here's just a quick example of doing a simple t-test